everybody. I'd just like to introduce the next speaker, who is, hi Liz, who is Dr. Liz Fletcher. Liz is Director of Business Engagement and Operations at the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre, Bioic for short. Liz, do you want to try to share your screen while I'm introducing? Is that okay?
Yeah, I shall do that right now. Make sure it's all working.
Yes, that looks like, yeah, that all looks good. Good. So I'll introduce you, Liz, and then hand the floor over to you. So Liz joined iBioIC in March 2021, so not so long ago, as Director of Business Engagement and Operations. So probably have met nobody at iBioIC yet. With
absolutely right.
Tends to be managing, and she manages the day-to-day operational aspects of iBioIC. She helps shape the Innovation Centre's strategy, helping to deliver its key aims of building new opportunities and accelerating commercialization. Liz has had a varied career across the life sciences and biotechnology sectors, from research roles in academia at Sydney, Toronto, and Cambridge University, and the biotechnology industry. She then spent 6 years as a science and business writer and editor at FT, Financial Times, I'm assuming, and Nature Biotechnology, before venturing into technology transfer at the University of Southampton. She moved to Scotland to work for ITI Life Sciences as a technology and market analyst, transferring to Scottish Enterprise as an analyst in the life sciences sector team. For the last 7 years, Liz was manager of the UK Centre for Mammalian Synthetic Biology and senior research development manager at the University of Edinburgh. Liz graduated with a degree in pharmacology from the University of Bristol and a PhD in neuropharmacology from the University of London. Liz, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Gary, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to join you at your really fascinating event. I feel a bit intimidating trying to follow the last two talks. I feel my talk's quite terrestrial in comparison. But what I hope to do today was to maybe look at, biotech in the built environment in a slightly different perspective from industry and innovation, and hopefully we'll be able to share some things that perhaps you hadn't heard about. So my talk will be structured around 4 areas. I'll tell you a little bit about the Innovation Centre and how we define industrial biotechnology. Talk a little bit about waste and why worry about it. I then look at who's doing what with waste and give you some case studies, largely from our membership, but not exclusively. And then maybe touch on the challenges and the opportunities that might be ahead for somebody that wants to make wealth from waste in the future. So a little bit about us. We are a networking and support organisation, and we were set up in 2014 to stimulate the growth of the biotechnology sector in Scotland. We're one of 7 innovation centres funded by the Scottish Funding Council and Scotland's enterprise agencies. The other 6 centres are all in sort of what we're deemed to be high growth sectors for Scotland. And we are there really to help ease innovation. So help academics and small businesses get innovation into products and services to serve global marketplaces. And how we do this is we have a suite of offerings. We have funding, very importantly, and we fund academic industry collaboration that helps de-risk really innovative high-risk ideas and proof of concept projects. We also have in-house a lot of industry expertise and also can provide you access to our facilities. We have facilities based at Heriot Watt Strathclyde University, and they're all around bioprocess development and scale up. So if you have a process, you can come and work with us and we can do scale up to around 30 litre volumes. So pre-pilot scale, but still more than perhaps most people could do at the bench. First and foremost, we are a networking organisation, and so we offer our academic partners and our industry members opportunities to connect with one another, to be informed about trends and what's new, and we do this through events, unfortunately, mostly at the moment face-to-face, but a lot of workshop type events. And we host an annual conference every year at the end of January, beginning of February. And it's now the largest industrial biotech conference in the UK. And we do invite you to join us. We obviously had an online event this year, but we had 700 people attend. And in fact, it was great to see people joining us from all across the world. And last but not least, skills. Over the past few years, we identified that there was a shortage in skills around biotech, industrial biotechnology. And so with our partners in further education colleges in Scotland and across the universities, we've developed a sort of integrated programme of training right through from outreach in schools through to HNDs in industrial biotechnology with further education colleges and MSc and IB. And we also host a BBSRC funded collaborative training partnership. And for those of you who don't know, these are all industry-led PhD projects in collaboration with industry. So you ask, well, okay, what impact have we had? When the SFC look to see what we've done with the money, what are they looking for? Well, we now have 130 members, and our members do pay a fee to join. It's triage depending on the size of the company, and more than half our companies are small or micro companies, so very innovative people. We funded over 90 collaborative research projects, and those are well over 50 companies, and we do have lots of repeat business, which we think is a good sign. And we're really proud that we've recruited our 100th PhD student this year, and just getting our last cohort of MSc students through their projects. There's about 182 of them now, and in total leveraged around £70 million towards Scotland's bioeconomy. So why is this important? Well, Scotland has its own national plan for industrial biotechnology. The UK doesn't. It has a bioeconomy strategy, but Scotland, way back now, in 2013, developed a national plan. And there was an ambition to grow what was a really small sector at the time, only 24 companies, pretty small turnover, to really boost that and get a really vibrant cluster of companies working with or to develop industrial biotechnology. And last year we found we have around 130 companies, about £750,000 of turnover, so we're doing pretty well, but there's still room to go. And obviously we've got Brexit and COVID fallout to contend with over the next couple of years. I think it's worth sort of saying, well, what do we mean by industrial biotechnology? And I think it's fair to say it's quite difficult to define. Everybody has their own definitions. There's one here about using plant or waste resources and bio-based processing to produce chemicals or materials, medicines, energy. But I think more simply, it's just about doing stuff with biology or using natural products, natural materials. And why is it important? It underpins so many of the goals for both the UK and internationally towards reducing carbon dioxide production with our, very ambitious net zero targets around keeping the planet, cool. So keeping a temperature rises within the 1.5 degrees centigrade range, reducing waste, which I'll talk about later, and also creating more circular economy. So I think, John described that really well with plastics, about that need to really make it circular, not just a bit of, recycling here and there. And hopefully it will also underpin the growth of new careers, new companies, new jobs as we transition away from our dependence on the petrochemical industry. Oops, sorry. Get happy there. When the Innovation Centre was created, 7 years ago, there was very much a focus on green chemicals or greening the chemicals industry. And indeed, a lot of the focus of our work is still on that. But if you look at the kinds of projects that we now support across the sector, you'll find that industrial biotechnology, with its underpinning technologies such as synthetic biology, biocatalysis, DNA synthesis, microbiology, is generating a range of products and services that we probably could have only dreamt about, 2 decades ago. So we fund projects in textiles and materials. We've got one in construction, in bioplastics, in pigments, in alternative proteins that are now competing for, the meat proteins, and also food and food additives. And I guess as the last year has shown us, industrial biotechnology is applied to medicines, especially vaccines as well. These are all effectively bioprocessed products. So industrial biotechnology offers us a route to make carbon savings or environmentally friendly products, but it also makes products people want and they need. And that's really important to note. So, well, let's talk a bit about waste. Well, waste needs managing, and so it's a really big headache for a lot of people. It also contributes to our need for landfill. it contributes to pollution, it creates greenhouse gases, which contribute to climate change. But really importantly, and I think as John articulated, it does use up finite and valuable resources that we need to keep hold of. And increasingly, there are controls, both in the UK and Scotland and internationally, on how we regulate waste and setting very, very ambitious targets. And I think it's worth being mindful about that when you think about, developing business opportunities in this particular sector. So, just a sort of light touch look at the drivers and the controls around waste management in the UK. We obviously have a really ambitious net zero target, reducing, carbon emissions to zero by 2050. And we will need to better manage our waste if we're going to achieve that. And waste and resource management features really, really heavily in the Environment Bill that's just going through Parliament at the moment. And so that will provide new directions for how we manage waste, water, oil, air pollution, agriculture. They'll all be interlinked. And even companies that make stuff that ends up in waste are not going to be left off the hook with the extended producer responsibility, which will, put the onus on them to do something with them, something useful with the waste that they create. And I also mentioned DEFRA's waste hierarchy in a couple of slides. And Scotland really, it's a bold nation, but very, very similar landscape for policy. We have a net zero target slightly earlier by 2045, like to be distinctive, with the hopes that the fact that we have an awful lot of renewable energy sources help us achieve that 5 years earlier than the rest of the UK. We also have, extremely stretching targets to get 70% of garbage recycled and very little going to landfill. And about in 2019, Zero Waste Scotland put together an action plan to reduce food waste by 33%, and that all the sort of biodegradable, compostable materials, none would go to landfill by 2020, within 5 years. So there's a lot of pressure from government policymakers around us taking a different look at our waste. And I think it's really nicely summarised in this waste hierarchy. I think it originated in Europe, but this is on the DEFRA website. And it's very much forcing us to take a new look at waste, to focus our efforts on not creating it in the first place through more mindful design and production of materials, encouraging us to recycle and reuse as far as possible, so that disposal to landfill and incineration is definitely, waste disposal of last resort. And I think where IB fits is in the little blue box around recycling and other recovery. So I think that's really where it can play an important role. At the moment, there's quite a lot of interest in turning waste into energy and heating, renewable energy. So there's quite a few government-funded initiatives in exploring new bioenergy crops and investments in municipal waste, waste to energy recycling. In fact, there is a plant just being built near me. I live in Dunbar, between Newcastle and Edinburgh. But is burning it really the right solution? I'd argue that there's definitely perhaps for us to take, to treasure our waste perhaps more than we do. So we definitely shouldn't waste it. And why? Because one industry's waste can be, and consumer waste can be another industry's gold. It's biomass, it's feedstock for a variety of to develop a range of new products and services. It is a way to help us reduce our reliance on petrochemicals. And by reusing carbon, keeping it in a sort of renewable carbon cycle, we can contribute to our net zero targets. But even more, it provides feedstock, provides material from which we can build a whole variety of products and services using the power of biotechnology. So for the uninitiated, how do you go about extracting value from waste? Well, to some extent, it's really, really similar to the way that you'd extract value from petrochemicals. So you develop a refinery, we call them biorefineries. So here, instead of using the crude oil, the inputs are, natural products, waste like forestry waste, seaweed, waste from fish farming, agricultural waste. Those are then converted, broken down, or refined using a combination or separately chemical, biological, and thermal processes, and to provide a huge range of products that can go, materials that can go into a wide range of products from specialty chemicals through to materials and medicines. And this new paradigm has really been accelerated by the advent of new technologies such as engineered biology, synthetic biology, of which given I recently managed a synthetic biology research centre, I definitely have a passion for. And so obviously scientists can now build new functions into cells, for example, by engineering them to grow on perhaps a different feedstock or to produce a different metabolite. And in the past, this process was extremely time-consuming, expensive, and labour-intensive. But with the advent of new molecular biology techniques, and as this graph shows, a precipitous decline in the price of DNA, it's now possible to engineer all sorts of changes in cells of their functions quickly and relatively cheaply. And that is definitely fueling a lot of creativity within the sector. To some extent, what you can do is really only limited by your imagination. So the factories of the future, within those biorefineries will be cell-based. So yeast, as we know, has been used in brewing and baking for centuries now. But today people are engineering it to make pigments, materials to form beautiful textiles, and even medicines, and much, much more. So who is doing what with waste? So I have to apologise, obviously, I have a very Scottish focus because our innovation centre is headquartered up in Glasgow. But I thought it's useful to provide some examples of our local business and our local environment for waste as sort of a case studies, if you like, of what could happen, anywhere in any region. So hopefully these are relatively representative of what's happening internationally. So about 5 or 6 years ago now, the Scottish Government had a look to see, what was Scotland's waste? What was its biorefinery potential? And what could you do with the waste that was there? And they found that there was 5 main sources of waste, which is perhaps not surprising because it reflects natural resources, our geography, and also our native industries. So the 5 were whisky, of course, because we're really big in distilling and drinking the whisky, waste, garbage, municipal waste, agriculture. See, Scotland has grows a lot of potatoes, barley, and soft fruits, for instance. Forestry industry, lots of trees in the Highlands and Islands area, and also obviously it's marine industry, so fishing, fish farming, shellfish, and seaweed. And the analysis suggested in total there was around 27 million tonnes of these materials. So let's call it biomass for the sake of argument. Brewing and distilling alone created waste that contained, quite colossal amounts of useful protein and carbohydrate, which until then, some of it's thrown away, but in fairness, some of it is fed to animals or put on the land. And they worked out that the biorefinery potential of beer, whisky, and fish combined could be worth, up to £800 million. And, this opportunity didn't go unnoticed by entrepreneurs and innovators in Scotland and has given rise, I think, to quite an interesting landscape of companies that are trying to generate value or valorise the waste in Scotland. So I'll give you some examples of some of those. So let's start with whisky, and I have to say, I have to make an apology to anybody that is intimate with the whisky industry, because apparently the whisky industry doesn't actually make any waste. What they do is they generate co-products. So they've removed the term waste from their lexicon, if you like, and that's true of some other industries as well. So I do use the word waste rather colloquially here and not in its strict definition. So it does produce quite a lot of co-products, the draff, which is the solid stuff that's left after you mash the malt and the grain together before fermentation. Fermentation produces, as you'll all know, carbon dioxide and heat. And after distilling, there's a bit of stuff at the bottom of the still that's called pot ale, and that's really nutritious. It's all got sorts of nutrients in it, bits of carbohydrate, copper, for instance. There's quite a lot of that produced every year. And there's 3 companies in Scotland that have seen value in these. And they're all doing quite different things with the same kind of co-product source, which I think is really interesting. The first is Algae, Algae is a startup company still, although it is doing some semi-commercial production, created by actually an MSc student from the University of Edinburgh, Douglas Martin. His idea was to use co-products and use it to grow microalgae. And of course, microalgae are really rich in omega-3 oils. And fish that are farmed need a source of omega-3 oils. So the salmon that are great for you with these fantastic oils are only got those oils because they feed on other fish and shellfish that contain them. So you have to feed them this particular oil, but it's very expensive and currently generally sustained by catching wild fish. So in order to make a more sustainable fish feed, Douglas spotted the opportunity to grow algae on the co-products. And so that's what they're doing at the moment. So that's a really interesting market opportunity. Horizon Proteins was actually a startup from Heriot-Watt University, and they're extracting that protein from the co-products and just feeding that protein to the fish. So again, targeting the fish feed market. And then Celtic Renewables, the spin out from Napier University, took a completely different route, and they're converting all the byproducts into high-value chemicals using a very old fermentation process, and they are now going to commercial scale up. So 3 companies looking at the same waste stream from an industry and doing really different things with it, which I think is a really nice story. If we look at our marine sector, Oban company Quantec saw that there was a lot of shellfish left over from the shellfish industry. So, shells from crabs, langoustine, shrimp. These are all very rich in chitin and chitosan. And what they've done is developed a transparent material biofilm that can be used as food packaging material. The advantage, compared to plastic, it's compostable and it has some antibacterial properties. So it does very much support a circular economy. And I believe that they're looking to use it as a film for seafood products. So I think there's quite a nice symmetry there of, really circular approach to taking the waste back into the industry that it originated from. A company called Cellucomp is based in Fife, used leftover carrots from the agriculture sector, food processing sector, and extracted cellulose nanofibers. Its first product is called Curran, and it can be added, it's an additive that can be put into things like paints, packaging, and cosmetics. So we're exploring a whole variety of options at the moment. Because it's natural, comes from a natural food source, it's not, it doesn't use a lot of chemicals to extract it, so it's quite a clean production process. Our Innovation Centre recently funded a project with Cellucomp where they looked to see whether or not this material might be useful in the healthcare sector, obviously with what's been going on with supply chains for healthcare products. So they're interested to see whether or not it had any benefits. So they worked with James Hutton Institute based in Dundee to explore whether or not the material had antiviral, antibacterial or antibiofilm forming functions, and they got some great results. And I think they've now gone to and won about £500,000 of funding from Innovate UK to develop that technology further. So a really great opportunity to take product into a different market. And while we're on the topic of fruit and veg, one of your 5 a day, an area I think is really fascinating is the move towards using waste in the fashion industry. Many people won't use animal-derived clothing products. Leather is an obvious culprit, and there is a huge trend now for vegan leathers made from waste from fruit and veg processing. One of the first is probably from the manufacturer of Freemats. It's an Italian innovator who took the leftovers after juice has been extracted from apples and processed it into a leather-like material. And the material does have pretty much all the properties of leather. Waterproof, is quite strong and flexible. You can print it, colour it, etc. But people haven't stopped there. You can find materials made out of pineapple leaves. A company called Pinetex on the top right-hand corner of the screen. That's Pinetex pineapple leaf fabrics. bark and leaves. People even making it out of what's left over when you press grapes to make wine, which sounds fantastic. And at the top left hand, that's actually made out of fish skin and scales, which kind of sounds disgusting, but apparently the bag doesn't smell fishy at all. And that's made by a company called Osklen. And this is pretty significant market opportunity. So analysts suggest that the market could be valued at around $90 billion US by 2025. And it's a good example of consumers, ethical consumers, concerned about the environment and animal welfare, really driving technology in industrial biotechnology. Back to something perhaps less glamorous, but equally as important, is what we do with waste oils. There's an awful lot of left from cooking, from many industries that produce all sorts of sticky, gloopy byproducts. And a company called Argent Energy has developed an innovative process to produce biodiesel from this kind of waste material. And they now produce 50 million litres of biodiesel in their site in Motherwell. And our innovation centre helped support them work with the University of Edinburgh to see if they could actually start using fatbergs, which are, I'm sure you're aware, the disgusting conglomerations of waste oils and human byproducts that block up sewers. So they were looking to see whether or not they could convert them, using a combination of enzymes and greener chemistry into higher value products. So again, making the most of the waste that we can get our hands on. Another one of our members, that's a Manchester University spin-out called Holifirm, has taken a different look at using oils and is fermenting it to make new surfactants. Surfactants obviously found in a wide variety of consumer products, from shampoos, detergents, washing powders, but also very, very important for many industrial processes. But most surfactants today have been made from petrochemicals, environmentally, they persist in the environment, pretty damaging and can be quite toxic. So there really has been an increased demand in these biosurfactants, which are can be fully biodegradable and are generally less toxic. You may well yourselves already buy products that contain biosurfactants. There's a huge market for these products, valued at around $2 billion, because again, consumers are buying them. And anyone for coffee, UK coffee industry generates colossal 500 million tonnes of used coffee grounds, and a Glasgow-based company called Revive Echo spotted the opportunity. Coffee grounds can be very oily, and there is oil still in the grounds which they're extracting, and these are natural oils, and they can have potential applications in medicines, cosmetics, food and drink industry. And what's left over makes for quite a good soil improver. So again, trying to extract the greatest value from the waste that's produced. And last, forestry. It's not an easy lignin valorization. It's a hard nut to crack. But there are companies, although not many, it's fair to say, in Scotland and the UK, interested in trying to valorize forestry and other, very fibrous plants. But Nova Pangea is based in Wilton, Redcar, has developed a proprietary technology that's looking at a way that it can process plant biomass and forestry byproducts into a variety of high-value chemicals. So there's still opportunities there in the forestry sector. And I thought, given the title of your, the name of the hub and the conference, it's probably worth giving a little bit of a nod to the types of activities that you see happening in the area of materials, biomaterials. So an Edinburgh-based company called Indie Nature is building bio-based insulation materials using local crops, including hemp, which hasn't been grown for many years, but they're reintroducing it. And the products that they've released already, one of them is some insulation, has all the properties of the original, the more traditional insulation materials that you use, but actually houses an ability to reduce the carbon footprint of a house, because it effectively produces a net capture of carbon. So it's a really interesting approach to new building materials, thinking about the whole, carbon footprint of them, because the built environment accounts for about 40% of the UK's total carbon footprint. So there's a lot to be done there. One area I think is really fascinating is the concept of biocement. And obviously, you know, as many of you know, cement production is a really dirty process. It contributes to about 8% of global carbon emissions. And Biomass is a North Carolina-based company, has created a microbial way of bringing calcium and calcium and carbon together to create a cement-like material, which has all the properties of cement. In fact, it cures faster than traditional cement, and it really doesn't require a lot of heat to produce, doesn't produce a lot of carbon dioxide. And they also use non-GM microbes, so they get around any sensitivity around genetic modification. And maybe in the future, we could just grow our own materials for our houses, for our upholstery, for our clothes. So there's a whole group of companies now engineering new materials. MicaWorks, for example, makes really beautiful leather out of mycelium, so fungi basically, and they make it for very high-end premium clothing and car industry. Ecovative has developed a way of using mycelium as a glue to bind together things like wood chip to make furniture and packaging, and you know, they have now spun off. Well, a lot of companies around the UK and Europe now are actually using this technology to make all sorts of kind of interesting packaging materials. Some companies are actually fermenting new materials. There was a lot of press around bolt threads that make spider silk proteins. So they basically ferment the proteins that the spider would normally use to make its web. Obviously has amazing properties. It's very, very strong and bendy, great tensile strength. Spiber is also pursuing this particular marketplace, and they have very high profile relationships with designers like Stella McCartney and clothing providers like Patagonia and North Face. But it really raises the profile of the ability to use things like molecular biology, industrial biotechnology to make really exciting and different materials that are less environmentally damaging. And also, just to finish off, pigments and dyes, a lot of materials require colouring, and that whole process is very energy and water intensive, can produce a lot of unpleasant waste materials. So Colorifix is a spin out from University of Cambridge, is looking to make natural pigments in bacteria. So it requires more ambient temperature, not so many toxic byproducts, and a whole range of really beautiful pigments and dyes. So that's definitely another one to watch. So just in the last sort of 5 or 6 minutes of my talk, I think it's worth to say, you know, there are endless opportunities, I think, to make stuff from waste. There are entrepreneurs out there with fantastic ideas, scientists with great technologies, and consumers who are keen to buy environmentally friendly products. But I think there are still some challenges ahead that we need to address if we're going to make these types of products mainstream. So the first is about supply chains. So if I'm a CEO of a company that, let's say, Sense of Art, as just as an example, wanted to make a novel packaging material out of seaweed. So I have a bit of a headache because I need to be able to secure, you know, a really consistent supply of seaweed that's good enough quantity, the right kind of quality for the process. I possibly am going to need it all year round because demand may not go up and down with the seasons, as it were. I need to be able to store the seaweed, and I need to be able to get it at a price that still allows me to make a profit after my process. And I think the problem for people that are working on waste is, you know, you can't Google where can I get my waste from? You know, the database that contains all that information doesn't exist. In Scotland, we do have a biomapping resource tool, which was developed a few years ago, but it's already slightly out of date. And it only covers Scotland. So I do think it would be valuable to have a centralized database that really captures all the information about all the different types of waste streams, where they are, how you can access them, price, etc. If we're going to really create sustainable companies that can rely on biomass waste biomass to build a business on. The second challenge is around scale up. At our innovation centre, this is Neil actually, who's the manager of one of our scale up facilities. We support many startup companies who've developed a process which on a lab bench scale, so really small volume. But they're going to have to make their material at scale to either prove to an end user, a customer, or an investor that their process is commercially viable. And that process of technology transfer it's not straightforward. You do need a fair bit of expertise and input. And most companies couldn't afford to buy the kit that you'd need to go to that kind of volume. The UK does have some publicly accessible pilot production plant capability, but we probably need more. And quite often it's not always in the right location near the companies that need it. So we do need to build on that capacity and that network. And if we don't, we risk losing companies. And we have seen in Scotland, 1 or 2 companies that have gone to Europe to access this kind of capability. So if you want to keep our companies in the UK and to benefit from their commercialization, the jobs that they create, that we do need to help overcome this scale up headache for new businesses. And that's, excuse me, and another question that funders, investors, the government will now ask is, is going bio-based always better? Is the process that you've developed more less energy intensive, produce less carbon dioxide, better for the environment than more traditional routes? And the way that companies do that is use something called life cycle analysis. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with that. But there's not one tool. There's lots of different tools. They're quite complicated to use for the uninitiated. Quite often need to hire a consultant to do it, and that can be costly. So, as an innovation centre, we are kind of trying to encourage and push government to consider whether or not we need to go on more of a standard tool for life cycle analysis, or indeed support for startup companies that will help them make better decisions about the processes that they choose, and to help them make comparisons, product comparisons with maybe competitors or with their own internal product lines. So there is definitely a need there too. And last and definitely not least, it's all about really getting public acceptance of this new technology and new application. I think I find it difficult sometimes to explain what industrial biotech actually means. It's going to be very difficult to explain it to friends and family, to man in the street, to the government. Many people will say, well, isn't this just GM? Many of the examples I've given, I should add, haven't necessarily used genetically modified organisms, but really for the future and to really expand the portfolio of products that we can make, we will need to use engineered microbes in some form or other. Obviously, we're still suffering from the fallout from Monsanto. Europe is still very anti-GM. Maybe the UK will become more pro-GM longer term. We'll have to wait and see. And also, some people may think, well, I don't know, do I want this product? Is it made from waste? There's a bit of a yuck factor there. Maybe people think it's kind of dirty or contaminated in some way. But really, unless we can change hearts and minds, get consumers and end users to really think differently about where our products come from, we really won't be able to get the kinds of adoption that we need to really change our future and to aim for net zero. But I do feel very optimistic. And I think, interestingly, optimism is coming from our bigger players, like big household names like Unilever. A couple of years ago, they published their new strategy and their goal to remove all fossil fuel carbon from their cleaning and laundry products, which is quite an ambition. But this really sends a very important message to their consumers, that they listen, that consumers are wanting more environmentally friendly products. But it also forces their suppliers, the smaller companies that supply the components for some of these products, to change what they do and how they do it. And I think that really provides a great degree of hope that we can trigger change for the future. So our planet is definitely too good to waste. So we definitely need to make waste work for us for the longer term. And on that note, I would like to say thank you very much for listening. Please do find out more about what we do. You can become a member, especially academics. It's free to join. And you can sign up for our newsletters if you go to the bottom of our homepage, and we send information about news and events. Please do follow us on Twitter, or you can contact me personally at the email address there. And thank you very much for listening. I'm really happy to take any questions. I'm going to show you.
Thank you very much there, Liz. Great talk. Really, really nice. Lots of different angles, different companies, different types of waste. Really, really interesting. Yes, there is a few questions through the chat. So let me just get this right. So yeah, so what are the main barriers for startups in these biomaterials additives areas? What do we think are the main barriers to startup companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them is scale up. I mean, I think lots of people can do stuff, you know, in the university lab bench, and it looks really good. Yeah. We find time and time again, you know, at our scale up centres, is when you try and do it at scale, you can't reproduce what happens. So I think there's that technical challenge. And then in terms of just general startup, I don't think the challenges are any different to other industries, or, you know, startups in other industries. But I do think that the one good thing is I think a lot of investors have worked out that they need to do green investment, even if it's to offset their less than green investments. Yeah. So there's actually quite a lot of investors that have got the point about IB, you know, sustainable products. So, you know, I think from that point of view, it's very positive. Yes.
Yeah. Another question is about, do you have any advice for PhD students interested in developing a startup?
Ah, right. So yes, do it would be my
good.
Do it. Get yourself some training. Nearly every university now offers, especially for PhDs, they do that IP awareness, how to network, etc., etc. So definitely improve your networking skills, because you're really going to need that if you start up a company. You can't be shy, but go and speak to lots of people, investors, other businesses, and get yourself out to meetings. Yeah. Find out what the industry's doing, because that industry awareness, understand what your competitors are. People often say, I've got a really novel idea, and then you go like, you really haven't. Have you not looked to see what's already out there? So, you know, do your homework. But yes, I see, you know, our younger scientists are really hungry to be more entrepreneurial. I've definitely seen that within the university over the last 5 to 10 years. So absolutely go for it, but get some support. Talk to your local technology transfer commercialization group, get some training, and yeah, get out there.
And I suppose I know that iBioIC do lead one of the CTP, you know, for PhD studentship. Are there elements of entrepreneurship in the training courses associated with that?
Yes, that's a really big part of the CTP training. So it's very there's cohort training, and that covers, aside from the research training that they get within the universities. So they do, you know, IP awareness. They have innovation kind of workshop that's been developed by an investor. Lots of stuff around self-awareness, teamwork, presentation. PhDs also, because they all have an industry, they're all industry-led projects, so they always spend some time in industry. So that's a really good thing to do, actually, if somebody's interested. You know, if you're thinking about doing a PhD, then, you know, definitely think about doing one where you've already got an industry placement, because then you get that inside information. And they'll go along to our conference, for instance, and they meet and network with our members there. So
and I must say your conference is brilliant. I've been to a couple of them, by far the best one in the UK for IB. Another question here is, what do you think needs to change in the political sphere, atmosphere, and regulatory atmosphere to get us further down the circular economy road?
Yes, I mean, regulation. I mean, carbon tax, I can kind of see that happening. At the moment, the problem is there is an issue about price, isn't it? Oil is still quite cheap, and it still will be cheaper than maybe going down the bio route. So there's going to have to be some incentive for people to make the other choice. So I can see that being something that government will think about. I think, the issue around GM for the UK could be more permissive there. and that might also help generate a fair bit more momentum in that area. Yes, and I guess just sort of, you know, seeing what's going on. I think, you know, we've got a UK bioeconomy strategy, but it really hasn't sort of been translated into sort of meaningful activity. So I think, you know, I would really hope that the government needs to see there needs to be some more dedicated funding. For example, there was an industrial biotech catalyst, you know, 5-6 years ago, which really helped, you know, accelerate growth of the sector. And it's gone. We really need that back. Yeah.
Do you have a feel for how many of the companies you've just talked about and members of BioIC who have had sort of Innovate UK funding or some other type of innovation type funding that got them up and going and off? I suspect quite a high proportion of them.
Yeah. I think most of them are pretty wise to accessing public funding. So through different routes. Yeah.
Okay, the final question on the chat is, how do we make this green technology transfer more incorporated into the everyday?
Well, you know, we can as consumers, you know, we can buy those products, and we may have to be prepared to pay a bit more. I think that, you know, I think that's it. And we can recycle. We can recycle, and we can vote with our pockets that we want more sustainable products, and really back it and tell people about the need to do this as well. That we can all make a difference by what we choose to eat, buy, dress ourselves in, drive. So
it's down to the individuals. Okay, I think that is it. Let me just scroll down. That's it. I just had, I suppose, it very clever for the Scottish whisky industry calling waste products core products. That maybe that's the way around all of the regulations. That's just a joke, obviously. But thank you very much for the talk. Really enjoyed that. And obviously, as Liz said, I'm sure you'll field any more questions via your email or whatever.
Please do.
If anything else comes along. Brilliant. Okay then. Thank you.